This is the third color tutorial in a little series that I'm putting together for my classes. So the first one was on color systems, an overview. The second one was on different types of file setup using Process or Pantone or oil. And this one is also touching on using spot colors, Pantone colors, and looking at just a couple of other technical issues like trapping and so on. So again, I'm going to use a project that I've worked on. And this is a series of sort of mini catalogs that I put together for the OR gallery called NWC. And each one of them, their color inside, full color inside, because they contain a lot of photography of the artist's works. The outside cover is risograph, which is quite similar to silkscreening. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that process. Okay, let me just hide this. So this is what the InDesign file for the covers would look like. So what you're seeing here is the front cover and the back cover. And these are all set up with Pantones. Now, in the previous tutorial, we looked at we looked at this hardcover, and we'd looked at specifying Pantones for these. This is a slightly different process because this is talking about preparation for offset printing. And therefore, if I was to choose, as I did in this case, a Pantone color, what I'm doing is choosing from the full range of available Pantone color. There are hundreds of them. And the offset printer would use either pre-mixed or mixed ink at their end to match the Pantones. But risograph printing is a bit different, and this is also the case if you are working with a digital printer that can handle Pantone cartridges. Some high-end digital printing can now handle cartridges that are from Pantone, which means you can get metallics and neons and all that stuff. And in this case, in a similar way, I had to choose from a set of Pantones that the company had already invested in. In other words, they selected something like 20 Pantones that they offer, and that means they have those available at their end, at their printing shop. So I can't just pick anything I want. So I'll show you what this swatchbook for that looked like. Oh, that's my calendar. The swatchbook looks like this. So this is showing me the different Pantones. This is about maybe like a third of what they were offering. And then they have them in gradations, which are called screens. So let's say, for example, there's this mint Pantone 324, and here it is up close. And this is showing me what it's going to look like on an uncoated paper stock, which is what we're using. If I go into InDesign, I'm going to hide all these to keep them out of the way. If I go into my InDesign, let's find that mint. Here's that mint. This is set at a tint of 75%, and that would be a screen. So if I put it to, let's say, 50, that's a screen of 50%. We chose 75. And if we go back to that, you can see that's about what we would be aiming for. So the difference is not, this causes a lot of confusion. What happens here is that the ink is not watered down. It's not like when you're painting and you add water or white paint to make something lighter. This just means that the application is the sort of dots or lines that make up the screen are farther and farther apart. So it's kind of an optical illusion. For risograph printing, to be honest, I'm not quite as clear how that particular function operates, but at any rate, this is showing me screens of that. And you'll notice that for some of them, like, let's say, this neon pink is not a bad idea, not a bad example. So this is a fluorescent pink. And even a photograph doesn't fully pick up the fluorescence of this. But this looks like a magenta. It doesn't have quite the intensity that the actual fluorescent ink has. And a really good example of that discrepancy between what you see digitally on your screen, and the actual product that you're going to get would be the gold. So this gold here, this is a metallic gold. This metallic gold here, you're seeing it rendered through a photograph and rendered through a video, so you're actually seeing it compressed, but it does actually look like gold, and here it looks like brown. So if I was to present this to a client as a mock-up, I would need to do one of two things, and this is something that I actually did for this project in both cases. There were two people that were responsible for signing off on this project. One of them I visited because I was nearby, and I just brought along this swatch book and showed it to her. Another option could have been that I actually order a swatch book from her and send it to her, or courier that swatch book to her. And the other client, I sent a photograph. And in fact, this is one of the photographs I sent when we were selecting colors. So it's important that your client is clear when they're signing off on this, that there's going to be a difference between what they're seeing either on screen or in a printed mock-up that you've produced digitally and the final product. And in fact, if you're getting someone to sign off, sometimes you'll actually like tape or pin the actual chip right on top of it with a big circle around it, just to make sure there's no miscommunication. For students, sometimes there's an issue that you want to present either, again, on screen or printed digitally and show that you would like to have a gold effect, and this can be disappointing. So I'll show you one option. Let's say, for example, you wanted to mimic having gold ink or gold foil here, for example, on this tube. What you could do is actually just place a found swatch that you pull online. So I found a gold textured snippet of foil online. And so what I could do with this text is I could choose type, create outlines, and then I can just place the foil in there the same way that I'd place anything else. And now I just want to make sure that there's a couple of things that are clear here. First of all, if you ever set type to outlines, put that in a high quality display. See if you can see a bit better. First of all, if you ever set your type to outlines in a document, make sure that you've saved a copy of it. So this one says OL, so I know I'm working with a file that contains outlines. I would always save a copy that's editable and not just leave it at that. So at any rate, that's something that you could do to just kind of mimic it, to show your audience what you would like to do. You could also, if you're clever with Photoshop or clever with other Adobe products, you could add in a little bit of a sheen or something to just kind of show that there's a reflective quality to the surface as you intend. And then just to be clear, if you're actually sending it to press, don't do that. You'd want to work with the best available materials, in this case, gold ink. Okay. So I believe I mentioned this in the last tutorial, but I'll just mention this again. When you're working with ink, first of all, it reacts differently to uncoated as to coated paper. So coated paper tends to hold the ink a little bit higher up on the surface. You get a more vibrant result. You get sort of cleaner lines. And if you're working with digital printer, most digital printers that you're printing with will be working with a toner-based ink. And again, you get a kind of like richer result. So that's just something to bear in mind, that the paper that you use is going to make a difference. So as I mentioned, this one is on an uncoated paper, and you can see it's like a slightly rougher result. From our perspective, this is like a very pleasing result. It looked nice. And the fact that it's not perfect was part of it. However, I should mention, these are test pulls. In other words, this was not a final even color combination that we went with. You were just kind of testing these out to see what would happen. And one thing about risograph that's kind of helpful, just in understanding the printing process, I actually think that any student who learns how to use a risograph will have a much better understanding of print in general. But at any rate, you can see here the overlap that's making this area darker. So what you're seeing there is evidence of trapping, which is much harder to see on an offset press where the technology is much more refined. You don't really see it. If you got out a magnifying glass, you'd see it. But what happens is when these two plates are separated, so this is plate 1 and this is plate 2, the overlap here is showing that each plate is slightly bigger than it would be to just match. And the idea is that you don't want to have little white slivers showing up if it's not perfectly registered. So if we look at the output preview, for example, let's turn off the goals. Right, so it looks like there's an optical illusion that this plate and this plate cut off here. But in reality, this plate is a little bit, like overlaps a little bit here, and this plate overlaps a little bit there, and so on. And that's a process called trapping, which I don't teach and I don't even do it. That's something that I would get a pre-press house. I'd actually hire a pre-press house to do that for me if I needed to, but generally it happens at the printing end, not at my end. But trapping is something that exists. And so you can see it there. And where that's important for you to understand is if you look at like how delicate a little detail like that is, you have to think about how difficult it could be to line up registration, right? So let's say, for example, that you were printing this in CMYK. To achieve a color like this in CMYK, you're going to need at least 3 different colors. It would probably have some magenta, some yellow, and some blue. It might even have some black. And each one of those would be broken up into little dots. To try and make all of those line up cleanly in the width of this C, you get something fuzzy. So just to be aware of that, it's not what you get when you actually put things to print and what you see when you're looking at a screen are 2 different things. So be aware of that. And if I haven't explained that thoroughly enough that you feel clear on it, the short version of that is if you have relatively lightweight text, small lightweight text, and you're setting it in a light color, and you're sending that to offset press. That's a lot of ifs, check in with the printer that you're not going to run into an issue. That would be my short version of that. Okay. So in terms of numbers, let's go back to the numbers. Each one of these would be 2 colors, right? So as we talked in the last video, I'll touch on this again because I know that this is something I get asked about a lot. Each of these would be 2 over 0. And the 0, again, is because we're not printing. This is a piece of cardstock. We're printing on one side of it and folding it so that this is a front cover and this is a back cover. When you open up the book, the reverse side of this is just paper. There's nothing printed there. So this would, again, be 2 over 0. Each of these would be 2 over 0. Okay. That was really all I wanted to say on this one. I'm going to do one more of these where I'm going to talk about managing ink on press using a magazine as an example with multiple color photographs. And I'm also going to talk about special effects, touch plates, and quad tones. Okay.